behaviour is a fascinating quote from Nick Pope, ex-MOD. If we understand what really happened at Rendlesham Forest, we will really understand the true nature of UAP. What did he mean? So James Warrow and I have been on this quest to help John Burroughs, ex-US Air Force, find out what really happened to him when he was exposed to the highly strange at Rendlesham Forest. It's an important question for John that he's been on a quest to solve for the last 40 years. And the more we've looked into it, the more it seems very much there was some man-made meddling. I would really love to come to some definitive conclusions to really help John Burroughs understand what he was exposed to. Ever since that fateful night at Rendlesham Forest in December 1980, for 15 years John Burroughs has tried to ask the Department of Defense, the US Air Force, that he worked for, what he was exposed to. And it was completely classified. He never, to this day, has found out what was really going on. And the British MOD are no help either. They just don't want to talk about Rendlesham Forest or any of the associated laboratories or Finesse, Bawdsey, Martlesham in that area. They're keeping very quiet. Why? The Cold War is over, folks. 1980 was a long time ago. John Burroughs and the world really need to know what actually happened in Suffolk, England. So you'll probably remember, here's a link somewhere up here and in the description, to a film I made a couple of weeks ago about this place called Cobra Mist. So Cobra Mist was a large antenna complex and a big building built at millions of US dollars and a bit of UK money as well, on Orford Ness, right next to Bentwaters Woodbridge and between it Rendlesham Forest. And I keep hearing that Cobra Mist is the key, but Cobra Mist is just supposedly an over-the-horizon radar. That really makes no sense. Just up the road at Fylingdales is Europe's biggest over-the-horizon and phased array radar that can look deep into the Soviet Union and up into space. Why would the US and the UK jointly build an over-the-horizon radar that we know from leaked Soviet documents only covered Holland, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden and Finland? Allied countries that we have access to their radar, plus Fylingdales. Cobra Mist just didn't need to be an over-the-horizon radar. Then out of the blue, I was contacted by this person who has a history of working in large aerial facilities, radio astronomy and other things. And he said Cobra Mist was an EMP pulse weapon, which kind of makes sense, but nobody's admitting that it was. And he pointed me to a lot of technical details of the fact that Cobra Mist apparently was built backwards and is in a wedge shape. And this wedge shape is very important. And of course had the high power connectivity to Sizewell. And the building itself, the control center, was so double, triple, internally, outside and on stilts, EMP protected. Why would you need so much isolation for an over-the-horizon radar? It kind of makes sense, but this was mega protected, the Cobra Mist control building. It was if it was going to be zapped by something, and possibly it was going to be zapped by the EMP pulse that Cobra Mist was generating itself. So what he told me, just as one source, and that's an issue, and what this Russian declassified map shows is that the area that it covered was just the area that the Soviets would enter if they invaded Western Europe, and an EMP pulse would blast them back into the Stone Age. EMP destroys all vehicle electrical systems, aircraft would fall out of the sky, no computers, no communication, no kind of lights in your house, no phones, nothing. It would be a total blackout. But of course it would also be a total blackout for the nice citizens of Holland, Denmark, Germany, Finland and Norway. So it seems a bit of a doomsday weapon. And then I put my journalistic hat on, although I kind of understood what this guy was saying, and it kind of makes a bit of sense. And he also said that when it was closed down, the technology was moved to US Air Force Bentwaters. That also makes some sense to some things that I also knew about what was going on in Bentwaters with this group called SRI, Stanford Research. They were working on some project, and it seemed more than a coincidence that SRI were involved in Cobra Mist. They stayed in Suffolk, and then they built something at Bentwaters and at Rendlesham, which was possibly, he implied, a miniaturization of EMP to make it more practical, more tactical is the word. So instead of zapping our friends in Europe, it could be focused on our enemies. But I've got a massive problem with all this because it all comes from a single source and there was no verification. You know, Nick Pope probably knows what's going on, but I would not ask Nick. I mean, he's still covered by his oath to secrecy with the MOD. So I don't think he's going to confirm that what the MOD were saying wasn't a radar station, but was a doomsday weapon. I can't imagine anybody would actually admit that. But today, the classic email came in, this time from Australia. Thanks very much, Australia. Maybe you don't like Brits very much, because this is a really interesting document. This person in Australia works for the IEC, who are a electrical engineer organization worldwide, and they published a paper called TR6000 in 2002 called EMP Testing and Measurement Techniques, the Design and Function of EMP Stations. A bit dry, in fact. I think there's 102 pages of technical diagrams. But what he pointed out to me in this document, which I will share with you in the description, is something very, very, very interesting, because it confirms that the shape, the antenna structure of Cobra Mist was built like a wedge. Question to you viewers, are most over-the-horizon OTH radar stations wedge-shaped? No, they don't need to be. They're just a field of antenna. They work by bouncing power off the ionosphere to get that hop over the horizon, and then they pick up a really low signal which is scattered back up to the ionosphere, and all they can really see with OTH radar is Doppler shift, so you can see an airplane moving. You really can't see much detail, it's very scrambled. But the over-the-horizon radar stations like the one in France called Nostradamus, and the ones in America and the ones in Australia and all over the world, the big one in Cyprus, aren't wedge-shaped, they're just antenna. But let's look at this document together. Here's a whole bunch of very interesting facilities designed to produce an EMP pulse, mainly for testing. You want to see if your tank, your airplane, your car, or your phone actually is going to survive an electromagnetic pulse. And all of them throughout the world, including ones built in Britain, are either just overhead wires strung over something like a cage, or when they need to be targeted at a distant site, say a large airplane, like this classic one in Albuquerque called Trestle or Atlas. The EMP pulse generator is a wedge. It's more than just a wedge, it's Cobra Mist. You know, so is this the clue? And I'll put some of these pictures on the screen for you. You know, is this the clue that we've been looking for? Is this wedge shape, which is an EMP pulse generator for testing, here's one in Sweden, wedge, really what Cobra Mist was? I love bringing these stories for you. I like breaking the rules, to be honest. You know, if somebody tells me a story and I don't really have verification, but it's a good enough story and I understand some of the science, I'll actually bring it to you at the risk, as I've said in other films, of appearing like a plonker, because it might be wrong, I might be spun a tall tale, but in this case, I now think with this document from the IEC and looking at the actual shapes and designs of, oh, here's a good one, of EMP pulse, electromagnetic pulse generators, that the wedge shape is the key. The same shape that this facility in Orford Ness obviously was. Here's another one in Switzerland. And the other thing that this amazing report goes into, and I've reached out to its authors, is how you produce enough power to actually fire an EMP. And it keeps mentioning Marx generators, which is a bank of capacitors. I think, oh, here's one in Britain at Farnborough. It was really taken seriously, EMP. I think this document pretty well is confirmation that Cobra Mist probably wasn't an over-the-horizon radar. If that's the case, what's the implications? Well, first of all, there's a lot of lying going on, or a lot of people not telling the full truth. Obviously at the time for national security, but come on, let's actually admit what was happening. Because a giant killer or megavolt, million volt facility obviously might unleash something very strange in the Suffolk area. Was that what happened? Was the son of Cobra Mist that was developed probably at Bentwaters and at Rendlesham being tested in 1980, and did it unleash the highly strange? Did something else manifest in the Rendlesham Forest area, which was highly unusual, highly strange? I'm not saying it's out of this world, but it's something very odd. And of course, were the effects of EMP the effects that actually injured the service personnel? Was John Burroughs' heart damaged, his head, his eyes, and other people with other injuries? Can you relate those injuries to human experiments with EMP, or were those men and women exposed to frequencies that were unleashed by a human EMP pulse weapon that ultimately hurt them? On your behalf, viewers, I'm sticking out my neck. I'm now entering areas that nobody really wants to talk about to try and get to the bottom of what happened at Rendlesham Forest. The truth is out there, and we need to know it.